Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Scott Luton with Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's episode. You're in for a treat. Today, we're going to be talking leadership, and guess what? A lot more leadership. And we're going to be talking with one of our favorite business leaders. You may recall our guest today on previous manufacturing-focused episodes, but today it's all about his story. So let me introduce our featured guest here today. Our guest is a highly sought-after keynote speaker and leadership guru. I told y'all. He spent 30 years with the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, where he served in a variety of roles, including Director of North American Manufacturing and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Our guest also serves on several boards of directors for several organizations, to include the Association for Manufacturing Excellence. He's also the CEO and president of Linked Excel, a business operating systems architecting firm. We're going to find out exactly what that is. So join me in welcoming Mr. Billy Taylor. Billy, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Scott. Thank you for having me. That was a really nice introduction. I started to ask you, who was that guy you were introducing? But thank you for introducing me, and thank you for having me.
You bet. Always a pleasure. And today we really have the honor, but also the luxury of spending all of our time learning more about your story. You know, you've joined me as a co-host here on, I don't know, half a dozen episodes where we've interviewed a variety of other folks, but today it's about the Billy Taylor story. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you again. Thanks for having me.
All right. So let's get to know you better first. You know, some folks that may have seen those earlier episodes, they probably know that you're a great storyteller. They probably have an appreciation for all those leadership roles you've had, and probably an appreciation for what you do now, helping other organizations excel. But let's assume they haven't heard a lot of that, and let's get to know Billy Taylor first. So Billy, first up, where did you grow up, and give us the goods on your upbringing a little bit.
I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, as they say, Cowtown. My whole life was there. And then actually all of my schooling and upbringing was in the Texas area. And so I'm the oldest of four boys. So I have three younger brothers, and I let them know who's the oldest too. I don't miss that opportunity. But no, grew up in Texas, and in a household of strong standards. Really, leadership was at the forefront of our house. Growing up for my mom and the boys and my parents, it was always around what's the standard.
All right, so I want to ask about that. That's probably the most unique. And we've asked thousands of people this question about their upbringing, and I don't recall a single answer like that. So a house of standards. So give me one example of a clear-cut standard, a high standard that your parents put in place as you were growing up.
Well, it started with education, right? It wasn't the old cliche, and I'm going to be very transparent on the call, right? In inner cities where I grew up, people thought it was either athletics or entertainment that was your ticket out. Not in our household. My mother had standards around education, and she would always say, wealth is education, wealth is learning, right? And she'd always say, when you know better, you can do better. And so when we were growing up, all of us was very good. All of my siblings and I were very good in sports, but if we made less than a B, we couldn't play.
Really?
Yeah, you could not play.
Not the coach's decision, the parent's decision, right?
Yes. By school standards, we could fail two classes. No pass, no play said you could fail two classes and still be eligible.
Wow.
But in our household, if you made less than a B, you couldn't play. And so in the 8th grade, as a young man, and let's talk about standards, I was the star of the football team, and we were undefeated. And report cards came out. We were getting ready to play for the city championships. And
well, and just to level set for our audience, city championships in Texas is like the Super Bowl probably anywhere else. I mean, absolutely. Texas football reigns supreme, right?
Absolutely. And so people, when I say people, she took me off the team. Wow. And a week before the game, and from the principal to the athletic director. Everyone came over to my house to convince my mom to let me play. And my mother would say to them, and I hear it even ringing in my ear today, no, the standard is the standard. The standard is the standard. And I remember the comment coming from me, and I think, Mom, how could you do this to me? You're not fair. And I said, Mom, I'm going to play in the NFL one day. And her reply to me was, do you know what NFL means in this house if you make less than a B? I said, no, ma'am. She says, not for long will you be playing. Right? And she was right. And so fast forwarding, actually not playing in that game was one of the greatest life lessons of my upbringing, because my mother was right. And all of my friends observed that. And when I say that, when leaders don't have standards and hold people to those standards, not only do they fail the team, but they also fail themselves. And so with my mom, she talked to me about how much she agonized about making that decision as I got older. But she looks at me now and she says, I know that was the right call. And she says, as you grow up, you're going to have to make same calls with people you lead, but will you hold them to the standards? So we grew up in a house of standards, and not only just grades, keep cleaning up, housekeeping, everything around the house.
Well, I'm sure you could write a book only just a bestseller just on your upbringing. And we won't do it justice here in a little bit of time we have, but really quick, Fort Worth, Texas. What was it like growing up in Fort Worth? I'm not sure. I know it's the DFW, the Dallas Fort Worth area, but I'm not sure if I've ever spent any time in Fort Worth. Exactly. What was it like?
It was, one word, country. And so, and you know, it was, it's not the big city, stockyards. We would go to the rodeo every year. That was a big thing. Fat stock rodeo is what it was on the north side of town. Horses. It was nothing to see a horse riding down the road.
Really?
Cowboys. And we all wanted to be cowboys growing up. And I don't mean Dallas Cowboys.
Right. All right. Well, and I imagine barbecue is big in Fort Worth, Texas. Well, probably all things beef, I imagine. What is there, before we move on to your professional journey, is there a certain restaurant, hole in the wall place, or barbecue joint, or you name it, that was iconic and played a big role in your upbringing? Not coming up, but when I got to college, there was a place, Prairie View A&M, historically Black university and college is where I graduated from. They had a place called Bruno's, and what they were famous for was a Bruno baked potato. It was a big barbecued baked potato, and you'd line up to get that baked potato when you're in college, and it just resonated, right? You save up all week to go get you that one baked potato a week, and so that's what resonates with me. Bruno's, I love it. And gosh, lean times as college students. I can remember I bust tables in one of my jobs through college, and made $20 maybe on a good shift after the tip outs and stuff. And we had to find a way to make that last a long time. So baked potato sounds great to me. All right, so let's shift gears a bit. Your professional journey, again, 30 successful years and then some at Goodyear, where I don't remember the exact numbers from what the earnings were when you began and the billions of dollars it grew to by the time you wrapped up your career there, but tons of growth. Let's talk about a couple of key positions there or elsewhere that really helped shape your worldview.
Absolutely. I started out with Goodyear as a management trainee, and I was actually on third shift, in what's called the Banbury's, and it's a real dirty area. And I learned the core elements of being a good leader coming up in that position. Right, I was on third shift, working with the union, strong union, United Steelworkers Union, and that's why I started to make my mark as a young leader, progressing through Goodyear.
So if I could, really quick question, Billy, I think for some that may not get it, and really for my clarification, when you're a management trainee, you're on the management side of the table, right?
That's correct.
And that means you're not on the union side of the table. So I imagine there were some early lessons learned in your career of how that worked, right?
Yes, absolutely. There's a bit of bargaining when I say that, give and take. But more importantly, when dealing with the unions, right, it's important to make allies, not adversaries. And you do that by earning the trust, right? And when I say that, one of the things that I quickly learned was there's two rights, right? When you start earning the right to change, it's the technical right, okay, and the cultural right. The technical right is I give you a check, I give you work instructions, I give you a job, just go do your job. Those leaders, they don't last long. The cultural right is respect, trust, understanding differences, embracing differences. And when you actually earn both rights, the technical right and the cultural right, most unions will become allies with you. And so for me, that's what I did. I was very deliberate around how I communicated. I was very deliberate around not only letting people know what they own and in the process, and that's how I built relationships with unions.
I love that. Far beyond just manufacturing plants. I think if we all work to create more allies rather than adversaries, the world would be a much better place, right? Especially being deliberate about it, which is what kind of what you're painting. All right. So again, key positions that shaped your worldview. What else comes to mind? And then we're going to get to your key eureka moments.
So as I rose to the rank from my area manager trainee, I actually moved to being a specialist or a production specialist. It talks about improvement and efficiencies, and that was my job. And then I got tapped on the shoulder to run a small business center or department. And that was a lesson because I was so young. And the people that hired me and trained me were now reporting to me. And that was difficult. And a valuable lesson learned there, going back to my upbringing standards. I was trying to get people to like me. I wanted to be liked, and instead of focusing on being respected and trusted. But that started with me, right? There's two things that I learned in that role. One was around, what do people follow? People follow credibility and capability. As a leader, what do children follow? Credibility and capability. And so as a leader, then I realized, you know what? I'm not trying to be friends with them. I'm trying to be a leader. And I want to be very clear, and you're going to hear the word deliberate a lot. Very clear on what people own, because what I realized, in the absence of ownership comes blame. And when people don't know what they're owning, you're not deliberate about it as a leader, they start blaming you for their mistakes. And at that point, when I talked about credibility and capability, and I'm going to go to deliberate ownership, as a young person, I realized I'm going to have to be deliberate around what everybody owns in the strategy. And it was interesting. My friends tried me.
Oh yeah.
They would come to meetings late. They wouldn't, I'm serious, they wouldn't show up to meetings. And it was just, it was really tough the first 6 months in that role. It was tough for me. But it wasn't long that I caught on. And going back to my mother's lesson, the standard is the standard.
Right. The standard is the standard. And that bit of clarity makes things a little bit easier, right?
Absolutely.
So in hearing you describe those early days at Goodyear, and even if they were tough early days, it seems like to me that leadership would be better in other companies, manufacturing otherwise, if folks kind of started on the plant floor, doing what they eventually would manage. That was that a big benefit to your career with Goodyear?
Well, that was a benefit, understanding, right, what I was expecting others to do. But the greater benefit is everybody needs a coach. And when you're starting to go through your ranks, be humble about that. Ask for that help, because you know what? Bill Belichick has a coach. Although he coaches others, he has a coach.
Right.
And so everybody needs a coach to help you see your blind spots, to help you navigate, right? The worst thing I think leaders can, the worst approach is to think you know enough to know you're right and not being willing to learn to know when you're wrong.
Right.
Because now you're going to keep doing what your old paradigms are. You're going to keep going down that road and you're not willing to change. And quickly what I realized when I became that young manager was, I tell people I had 13 degrees, right? I have 13 degrees. And they're like, you're pretty smart. Absolutely. I was smart enough to earn 2 and hire 11. Okay. And I used all 13 of them. because I'm not strong in some of those places.
I love it. Speaking of not strong, I heard a phrase the other day. I don't think I was on a show. I think it was a private conversation, and it could have been a little bit of negotiation. Could have been just something. We were doing numbers, and I made the comment, "Hey, I'm not math. I need a calculator." And then
Yes.
the person I was with said, "Well, I'm not good at public math. So yes, let's grab that calculator." So it was really a lighthearted moment. But we all have our weaknesses.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And I think one of the things that you're speaking to is that outside eye, right? We only, you can be Bill Belichick and have all the rings he's got. You can be Michael Jordan and have all the rings he's got. You can be Ric Flair and all those wrestling championships, but there's someone that sees you from the outside with a different perspective and always can see something that you cannot see simply because we're human, right? And we can only be so self-aware, right?
Absolutely. And when I look at, and the best of the coaches understand that, they embrace the fact that success, it's required that you have others around you. And, I look at I read a lot of books and I look at a lot of video. I try to read 2 books a month.
2 bucks a month.
And
Man,
that's
is that the
goal.
standard? Is that
is
standard?
the standard. When I don't hit that mark, I feel guilty. Right. It's like on a diet and eating that cake and I feel guilty. Okay. And so for me, I just want to share something I learned last month in some of my reading. I was reading something around Nick Saban and they were talking about his process and his standards. And he says, you know what? I will tell you, people think I'm so hard-nosed that I don't accept failure. And he says, you know what? No. As an individual, you are allowed to fail. That's just part of the process, right? But what you're not allowed to do is intentionally make decisions that cause the team to fail. See, you can't fail because failure, and I was reading, failure is leased, it's not owned. And you have to pay rent every day on success. That's that commitment. But the process of being successful has to be owned.
I love it. All right. I love that. So I know there's 30 years at Goodyear, all kinds of different roles and leadership positions and results. I know that we could probably dedicate a whole series to that. Let's talk about, you, as I mentioned on the front end, you led North American manufacturing for the company. You also served in that Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer role. How did those, really senior level roles, shape how you view the world?
I think when you look at it, and I'm gonna give it an example. As a senior leader, it's not about you, and so you have to move or be capable of moving from being the pitcher to the pitcher frame. And so what I mean by that is it's your job not only to help build strategy and deploy it, but you have to enable it. You have to work for the people rather than the people working for you. And just because you get to that role, don't make you a boss.
Right.
That's not a definition of a boss. Is not telling people what to do. It's enabling people so they can do. And that's the role. And then governing, though, you have to govern and hold people accountable. Now that you can't escape that. But most people, they want to be held accountable. Right. They want to own it. They don't want the pass.
I heard it put by several people in my career that 80-90% of a workforce, they want to win, right? They want to win. They may not have the know-how, they may not have the tools, they may not have the skill sets, or they might have to polish and work at some of the behaviors, but really internally they really want to win. Do you subscribe to that?
The majority today, I was with one of my clients. I spent the entire day with them. Great team, but they're struggling. And I sit in the room with the leaders and they didn't do 3 things. They didn't define winning. They haven't aligned themselves to win. And they have no visual type management to let people know if they're winning. And so when I say that, it's not the people that's failing the organization. It's the leaders. And when I walked on the shop floor today, I hadn't been there in a couple of months. All of the hourly people and the frontline workers, they were running up to me, right? They've got the ideas, but when they presented the ideas, the company didn't have a structure or a process to actually grow those ideas or to implement them. And so it wasn't the people, it's the leaders that were at fault. And at the end of the day, that's where we got to.
Right.
Yep. It's yeah. Often it's not the people. The people don't want to intentionally fail.
Right. Right. So you've already been sharing lots of eureka moments earlier in your career, and then when you're at the top of Goodyear, and now even when you're doing some consulting. What else, when you think of those your powerful eureka moments, what else comes to mind, Billy?
Well, for me, these are things that are people gravitate to being valued. If you make people visible, they'll make you valuable. And so what I see with my eureka moments is embracing differences. When you talk about diversity and inclusion, embracing differences, and people always most often gravitate, when you think of diversity and inclusion, you're thinking Black, white, you're thinking male, female, right. You're thinking those type of things. Diversity of thought, right? You know what, Scott? If you're in a room with a lot of your friends and you're a Cleveland fan and one's a Dallas fan and one's a Pittsburgh, there's diversity.
Right. That's right.
Right. And so there are differences.
Right.
And you embrace those differences. And I learned that one part of the journey of my career. One of the stories, I went to Tyler, Texas, and I show up and I'm going there to be the assistant plant manager. They didn't have any minorities on their executive staff. I show up on Monday as the assistant plant manager, and I'm scared to death.
Really?
It's in Tyler, Texas. They're having some issues. They're having tension, racial issues. And on Wednesday, they take their plant manager out and tell me I'm the acting plant manager until they hire someone. Now, the first thing I did was pray, okay? Because I was scared.
Hey, that's a strategy, right?
That was a strategy. That's the best strategy I had at that point. But more importantly, the question I asked myself is, why would they follow me? I didn't say that they were bad. I asked myself, it was an inward look. And what I do is I had meetings every day with 30 people to get to understand what was the current reality. But what I finally realized is the fact that they were coming in talking to me, they immediately started embracing me, right? Because everything they brought in those meetings, for the most part, I was implementing, I was helping. And what I did, it wasn't about those little ideas. I made them visible. I made their opinions feel valued. And that's what started to happen. And all of a sudden, that plant started to, they were knocking it out of the park. And instead of being an interim plant manager, and 6 months later, I'm running the plant. 4 months after that, I get promoted to the world's largest tire plant.
Wow. And that, as you said, shared pre-show, that was in Oklahoma. Is that right?
It was in Lawton, Oklahoma, and world's largest tire plant at the time. They made 65,000 tires a day, 3,000 people.
Wow. Round and black and out the back, as you say, right?
But that's what it used to be. And then when the quality standards came in, it wasn't just about the numbers. The customer wants what the customer wants. And as a young leader, I was really, these were some flaws of mine from a leadership standpoint, beyond the numbers, right? As a young person, I wanted numbers, round and black and out the back, just keep the tires flowing, right? At this point, no, what are the specs? What does the customer want? And you have to meet the customer need, but also you have to meet the needs of the people that are making the tires.
Yeah. Well said. Not all about quantity. I love that. Right. But I do love that phrase. I think, those are the type of little phrases, the little rhyme. It seems like it's easier for folks to wrap their head around it and embrace it. And then all of a sudden it becomes like a daily expression, a part of the culture. So I've gravitated to that myself. So, and you got lots of them, Billy.
Well,
you
Scott,
bring.
Go ahead. Another part though, that I like to express is when I get up in front of people and I get on podcasts,
right?
And people read a lot of the articles and they think about Billy's been successful. And I always say, what qualifies me to be on this podcast with you? It's not the successes I had. It's the failures that I overcame. It's the adversity, the lessons learned. That's what got me to say, when I stand in front of a crowd, or I'm going to coach an organization, it's how I help them overcome adversity. The lessons learned on how to deal with adversity, right? How to scientifically think, do effective problem solving. That's because I learned how to overcome failure, not because I was so successful.
Right. That's an excellent point and distinction. Now I want to talk about what you're doing now, but really quick, one final question related to kind of your rear view mirror. So diversity and inclusion, those two words go together all the time. And of course we hear about DEI, the acronym as well. I had someone tell me once on a podcast, powerful story. I'm not remember his name, but he immigrated from Korea, and was working for some big US companies. And he was talking about how the companies were great at ensuring diversity hiring practices, right? But they really were terrible at an inclusive culture. Can you speak to that? And do you observe similar dynamics out there in corporate America?
Yes, diversity is not a number, it's an action, right? It's an ownership. It's right. You see it, you see it, you feel it, and it's embracing differences. You do just as much harm by hiring an incapable minority than you do not filling that job. And so what I mean by that, diversity is what type of processes you have that put people on an even playing field, and saying, you know what, if you're not in the meeting, you're not in the deal. So how do I get someone on that interview panel so that they can present themselves?
Right.
And most often when you get that diversity in the room, you see it, you feel it, right? Because the consumer that are buying your product, they're diverse.
All right. So Billy, now that we've taken some time kind of looking in your past journey, right? And we'll talk about it in a minute, because you could write a whole series of books. And for some reason, Liberty tells me you got one already in the works. We'll talk about that in a second. Yes. I'd love to know better of what you're doing now with Linked Excel. So tell us, what is a business operating systems architecting firm?
So what we do is we work with companies. We work with Note Printing Australia that make the passports and currency for Australia. Work with PPG, and currently we're working with Continental Structural Plastics, which is now Teijin, and they make like composite parts for the Corvette body. And what we do is we go in and build an operating system, a daily management system tailored for their environment. And so it's not just the Toyota production system, and instead of being cookie cutter, it's not a cookie cutter approach. We go in and work with the team and build operating systems to run their day-to-day business 24/7.
Man, okay. And I can only imagine how much they can benefit from, we don't like to claim more than 2 decades of experience around here at Supply Chain Now, which I know we talked about that before, but your wealth of experience and leadership and getting stuff done and getting results and meeting that standard, which of course has been so important from your upbringing all the way up through your career. So I bet you've got several full plates of work there, huh?
Absolutely. And it's going so well. And I think for me personally, I know it's rewarding to see that growth, that internal growth in those organizations. And it's beyond the bottom line, right? It's beyond the P&L. It's a culture change. And that culture change, it's 24/7. You see the rewards on the people's face, and it moves from celebrating individuals to embracing processes. So you build evangelism around how you're running your company, and that's what's satisfying.
Love it, man. I love it. All right. So one more question, and then we're going to move to your constant studying of leadership. So when you think of so any companies out there, any business leaders might be listening, what's a couple of traits of kind of an ideal company you might work with via Linked Excel?
Well, in lots of we work with companies that are struggling to deploy strategy and tie strategy to tactical execution. And we help companies manage the intersections, right? Manage the intersections of their business. And often cases, we walk into companies, they're silos. And so their intersections are collisions, not connections. Right. And so, it's like we build kind of a GPS type mentality that you flow to where the constraint is. And by doing that, and once you eliminate the constraint, you spend your time as far as problem solving, eliminating constraints, flowing, eliminating the gnats, right? The things that frustrate organizations. And so that's what building a strategic deployment process and making sure everybody knows what they own in the strategy.
Right. I love that. Okay. And the gnats, man, they're small little things that are really small, but man, they sure are aggravating and can ruin your afternoon. Okay. Especially here in the Southeast where it's been a little while, but back in those years where all your friends were getting married and it seemed like every weekend you were at a wedding. I remember a couple of those down in Savannah and the low country of South Carolina and then in the afternoons and those things called no-see-ums.
Yes.
Oh man, small, tiny little bugs, but again, they ruin your day. Okay.
Yes.
So Billy, if I've picked up anything through the half dozen or so episodes we've been fortunate to do together and get to know you better, you are a constant study in leadership. And not only, all that you've done, but it's like you have 2 books a month. It's all your observations. It's what you learn when you sit down with clients or colleagues or other, keynotes, you name it. But you're constantly study. It appears to me at least leadership. So I want to talk about it a little more. And the first question for you is, well, I'll tell you what. I want to add a little question. Why is it so important to constantly learn new things and really constantly study new ways that folks lead?
The only constant in life is change. That's the only constant. If you're not evolving, you're dying. And even if you're a parent, if you're not evolving, right, you're dying, right? It's my son and I were FaceTiming today, which ended with him asking for money, but it was a great conversation. But what you learn, think about social media. And from my generation to my son's generation and what I'm doing in business. Right. He's my mentor. And that's the evolution of learning and right, things are going to change. And if I ask my son, what's an 8-track tape? What are you talking about? Right. And so if I was stuck in the 8-track tape days, then I wouldn't be moving forward. And so the evolution of learning is progression. It's not just reading books, it's what I see.
Right.
It's not being afraid or ashamed or too proud to ask why. My favorite question as a leader, and my people tell me, my people that I've led or partnered with me, I'd ask them, so what do you need from me? They hated that question. Now I would say, not what do you want from me, right? If I had a car, I want a Bentley. Right. I need a ride to work, right? And so what do you need from me? And once I provided what was needed, it came down to what they accepted. And then the second question was, why do you accept that? Why do you accept people quitting early? Why do you accept people not wearing their personal protective equipment? Why do you accept? Because what you accept, you can't change. Right. What you accept becomes a standard. So I'm constantly learning. And you know what? Standards are not monuments, right? You change them, you upgrade. How do you upgrade? You learn.
I love that. You mentioned being a parent earlier. My kids are a little bit younger, I believe. My oldest is in middle school, and I learned today, my lesson learned today is that it's highly embarrassing to middle school daughters when I crank up the 1980s rock and roll right as she's getting out in car line. She doesn't like that. Doesn't like that.
Not cool. Not cool, Dad.
All right. So sticking with leadership, let's talk about some excellent leaders that you've had the pleasure of working with, or they worked for you, or you may work for them. Give us a couple names and what made them such exceptional individuals.
Larry Robbins. Larry Robbins was my production manager. He was the greatest influence in my career.
Wow.
I was a young manager. I really didn't know how to lead. And he would invest in me. He would come by and take me on a walk every morning. But what the walk was, it was around establishing leadership standards, learning how to treat people. And I remember I was meeting with someone and I was screaming and I was cursing. And he just stood around the corner and he came back around. He goes, how do you feel? And I thought, I feel good. He goes, really? And he goes, how do you think the people that were watching you feel, that are following you?
Right.
Right. And he talked about the leadership example, and he wrote me up. He's the only person ever in my career to write me up. And he wanted me to have 0 losses to the customer, which was I thought was impossible. And he wrote me up and he goes, you want me to compromise? And he goes, do you think it's impossible or it's difficult? And I would say, Larry, it's difficult, almost impossible. He said, then it's achievable. And after he wrote me up, two months in a row, we had 0 losses. And so those lessons that Larry taught me about not only setting expectations, holding people to those expectations, but also giving them what they need. And he would hold me to those standards. And, I wouldn't even want to pick up the phone. I'd see his name in caller ID. When he wrote me up, I didn't want to pick the phone up. I'm like, I don't even want to talk to you. And he took me out. We actually went out to dinner. And he says, let's stop. Let's go to dinner. And he says, why do you think I come to work? And he says, I work for a corporation of one, and it's not Goodyear. He says, it's my family. He says, after work, my relationship with you is different. He says, so see these coins in my pocket, Billy? And he says, they all have something in common. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, read it. And I said, what? He says, they all say, in God we trust. He says, so that's why I'm coming to work. And so I never forgot that. Larry would say, you work for a corporation of one, and that's what your family and the people you love, and don't ever lose sight of that. And my son would say to me, Dad, you know what? I remember someone asked you once, how do you have time to coach AAU? And you replied, I don't have time to golf. Right. And so you have choices. And I always migrated to my family.
Right.
Right. Because that's the true corporation. And so that's what Larry taught me.
I love that.
He's a great leader.
I love that. You're talking about, you always have choices. I heard it put well one time that if you ever want to really figure out what your priorities are in life, and cutting through all the fluff and really know, is check your calendar and check your checkbook. That's right. Where your priorities are, truly. So there's always a choice.
That's right. And there's one other guy I'll be remiss to, Greg Guy. Greg Guy is the guy that hired me out of college. Now, and he doesn't tell a story. And the reason why he doesn't tell a story, because he doesn't want to paint the young Billy. He didn't want to paint the young Billy in a bad light. So what happened was, when I interviewed for the job, I went with my college fraternity brother, and we both claimed expense reports, but we drove one car. Afterwards, I get a call on Sunday from Greg, and Greg says, young man, we made, you made it to the finals, but we saw two of you get out of a car, and we don't want to offer you guys a job because of what we observed. And I stopped the call and I said, excuse me, sir, let me start by saying thank you for the interview, but please don't penalize Troy for what I did. That was his sister's car. I did that. And I want to say thank you for the interview. I've learned a valuable lesson here. No excuses. Thank you. And I'll talk to you later. And I hung the phone up. And he called me back 30 minutes later. He goes, this is with Goodyear. Young man, that's not the answer I expected.
Really?
That's not the answer I expected. I thought you were going to, he goes, and by the way, you were the finalist, not the other guy. I want to hire you. And right. And so what he told me was, everybody has something, right? Everybody has some things they're dealing with. He became a mentor and coach for me. And guess what? He became my mentor, him and Larry, as I went through Goodyear. And then Greg ended up reporting to me.
Really?
And we were at an AOP meeting once, and he says, it was funny. We had a great relationship. Although I was there, he was still my mentor. And I said, and he was up next, and I was going through him. It was pretty rough. He says, now listen, if you get on me pretty tough in this meeting, I'm going to stand up and say, I should have left your butt in college. I should have never hired you. And so those people, mentors, stay in your life. Yeah. So those are the people that taught me character traits beyond management traits.
I love that. And I know there's plenty of other characters and personalities in your journey. We'll have to have you back and talk more about that. And I think we'll have some opportunities coming up, but we'll save that for a later time. Let's talk about, it goes without saying here in late 2019 and 2020 and through 2021, and certainly probably going into the near future, challenging times doesn't do it justice, because it's challenging in a lot of the common challenges that are always there, right? Always there in industry. But then you've got all these unique challenges based on kind of where we are with the pandemic, where we are with innovation and some of the issues of the day, and then some. So if you had a room full of organizational leaders that are all scratching their heads and looking for some universal truths or some advice, what were some pieces of advice you'd offer up that room?
First, I'm going to ask them, how do they show up? As a leader, how do you show up? And then before we get into the strategy, are you going to do it to the team or with the team? Right? Because you know what? Extreme ownership. And it's our strategy, not your strategy. And so as the leader, those are two things. How do you show up? And the second one is, are you going to do it with the team or to the team or with the team?
Right.
And so with these leaders, and then I want to understand the strategy. And then I would give them the secret of success, the formula for success. Strategy plus execution equals results. And then they would look at me like, that's nothing earth-shattering. And I would say to them, but do you know why most strategies fail? Remember, strategy plus execution equals results. They fail because people don't know what they own in the strategy. And so how deliberate are you at being extremely clear on what the strategy is, who owns what in the strategy, and how are you executing? And I'd ask them one question. If you went to a football game, basketball game, whatever, and you're late, and you get there in the second quarter, you've got your popcorn, what is the very first thing you do when you get your seat? You look at the scoreboard.
Right.
You want to know if you're winning. And often the scoreboard is not a display of what the score is. It tells the coaches what they have to do next. If it's 4th and 1, what are you going to do? A 3rd and 1, you're likely going to hand the ball off.
Right.
Right. If it's 3rd and 10, you're likely to pass. And so those scoreboards, what's your scoreboard in your company? What lets people know if you're winning or losing? What's the rally call? And that's what I would tell a room full of leaders.
I love that. And when I think of a scoreboard versus a wall of metrics that you find in some plants, it's easy you can spend an hour looking at a wall of 100 different metrics and not sure if it's been a good day or bad day or good week or bad week. When I think of a scoreboard as you paint it, you've got several pieces of key information. It's very limited, but it's very powerful in what you need. And how important is that to direct your attention at those,
that's right.
Just a few metrics rather than a whole wall, right?
Absolutely. And we own the scoreboard. Even the fans, right? We own the scoreboard, and that's how powerful it is. And I often ask, if you were bowling, if there was a curtain in front of you and all you heard was a loud noise, you don't know how many pins you knocked down. So what do you do next?
You don't know.
You don't know.
That is a good one. Okay. So let's talk as we start to kind of come down home stretch. I appreciate that the hour or so we've spent with you. I know how busy you are, Billy. Let's talk about, because somehow you're finding some time. Maybe you got some clones, Billy Taylor, because you got beyond a burgeoning business and all the speaking that you do. You got some really cool projects coming up. Let's talk about the book that is set to release in a few months. Tell us about this.
So the book is with McGraw-Hill's publishing the book. We've been working on this book with some really credible people with credible practical examples in the book. But the title of the book is called The Winning Link. right? How to define, align, and execute winning strategies in business. And so it's a step-by-step process on really some of the things we've talked about. How to be deliberately clear on what you want to achieve at every level of the organization. How to be deliberate around who owns what, and to be deliberate around how you practice your day-to-day standard work.
Right.
And so it's really a practitioner's guide to being successful in business. And I don't care if you're a mom and pop donut shop, or you're this big Fortune 500 company. This book is applicable, and it has some funny stories in it and real life examples of failure and overcoming failure.
Love it. And we're still waiting. I think tentatively scheduled to hit book stands in early December, I believe, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That is right. Mm-hmm.
So folks, stay tuned. We'll give updates. We'll probably do some giveaways here at Supply Chain Now. I look forward to celebrating, which I know is going to be a home run or a home run book that's well received by all. So that's not the only project you've got coming up. We're excited here at Supply Chain Now, Billy, as we've been growing and as we look for been there, done that leaders that have just truckloads of advice and observations that are readily consumed by others, and also are wonderful storytellers. And that's just the tip of the iceberg with you. But we've got a little podcast series we're going to be launching with you here, right?
Yes, sir. We're partnering up with Supply Chain Now. I'm looking forward to it. We're going to launch a really engaging, interactive podcast, parlaying on the great foundation you've already built, and I'll be joining the team. And so you'll be seeing a podcast with myself and with some very engaging guests and practitioners, industry practitioners.
And I've had a little sneak peek at some of the show concepts, and Billy's got a slew of them. And it's going to be, it's going to get really creative, and it's going to showcase leadership in a variety of different ways, and stories, and overcoming all the speed bumps we have in life, and then some, or enjoying and continuing success. Because Billy, my hunch, and someone that comes from your track record, once you have that taste of success, you can't just do the same things.
That's right.
Because the challenges change a little bit, right?
Absolutely. And so I have a targeted type of guest that's going to be on the show. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be from LeBron James's high school coach to there's some just exciting people that are anxious to tell their story. And it's beyond the game of basketball. It's beyond what they did. And so that's what it's going to be. It's going to be fun.
Love it. I'm excited. This has been in the works for a ways, and you've got a bunch of, as we've talked about, a bunch of projects, but we're excited to launch that in the next couple of months here. So folks, stay tuned for a lot more information. But Billy, I tell you that the hour's gone by fast, and I feel like we're leaving so much on the table. So I'm looking forward to these future conversations already. But how can, based on your board work, your keynote work, your consulting business, of course, the upcoming book, the podcast series, all of the stuff you're doing, how can folks connect with you if there's, if they want to learn more?
Well, really, to learn about Linked Excel, you go to the www.linkedexcel.com. That's the website. You can see more about that company and kind of what we do. But for me, LinkedIn is, I answer my own messages. I read my own messages, especially on the weekends. I get back with people. I love interacting with people through LinkedIn. So my preferred method is LinkedIn. Just find Billy Taylor on LinkedIn.
I love it. Okay. So I'm looking forward to a lot more conversations like this, a lot more conversations from your guests, a lot more lessons learned, and a lot more Billy Taylor. So big thanks to Billy Taylor, again, CEO and president of Linked Excel. Look forward to seeing you again real soon, Billy.
Thank you. And thank you for having me again. To everyone out there, thank you for joining us.
You bet. Okay, folks, I tell you, we're just scratching the surface. I know it from firsthand experience with Billy here. You're going to enjoy, if this conversation wasn't enough, good news. There's going to be a lot more coming. So there's something, a new lesson learned with each conversation we spend here with Billy Taylor. Be sure to connect with him on LinkedIn. Be sure to check out Linked XL. More news on the book and the podcast to come. In the meantime, if you enjoy this conversation, be sure to find us at supplychainnow.com. Of course, wherever you get your podcasts from, subscribe so you don't miss a single thing. Most importantly, Billy, what was your mother's name?
Vera Taylor.
Vera Taylor. Okay. So folks, most importantly, do good, give forward, be the change, set the standards like Vera Taylor, and the world will be a better place. And on that note, we'll see you next time right back here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being a part of our Supply Chain Now community. Check out all of our programming at supplychainnow.com and make sure you subscribe to Supply Chain Now anywhere you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time on Supply Chain Now.